Kenzie, Vath, welcome to the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Kenzie, it is appropriate that we have you here for a lot of different reasons. We've been really excited about having this young author and activist and entrepreneur and all you. I mean, you are a polymath on so many different levels, which we're going to get into, and that's why we had you on this very special anniversary for Tick Boot Camp. This is our 400th episode at Tick Boot Camp. So, Kenzie, thank you for joining us for this episode. And why don't you download for the folks some of the things that you have going on, because there are just so many I couldn't list them all. But I want to begin with your book and talk about what inspired the book, and then talk to us about your work with the Global Lyme Alliance, and then sort of build out for us some of the things that you're doing professionally.
Sure. Thank you, Rich. That is just a glowing introduction. I'm so honored to be on Tick Boot Camp, and I'm so excited to share a little bit about my story and hopefully inspire those that are struggling through chronic illness, especially tick-borne illness. So to get started, I am more than excited about being number 400. So I just wanted to state that and put my little star up there. Yes, number 400. Last year I dedicated as a portion of my time to write a book called The Ignored Pandemic, Real Stories of Lyme Disease. You can get it on Amazon. And basically what this book is, it's nothing like anything out there currently in the Lyme published space. It's kind of Lyme 101. Get to know if you're recently diagnosed, a caregiver, and you want to learn more about Lyme, this is the book to go to. In addition, it's a collection of stories from people from all around the world, because this is a global pandemic, not something that's just, prevalent in the East Coast, but obviously I'm in the West Coast and I have Lyme. So I wanted to showcase something that was a little bit more global and a little bit more impactful. And it was something that I was super passionate about, was telling other people's stories that maybe don't have the means or the opportunity to publish. So this is my third published book, but my only one specifically to Lyme disease. And I was told in school I did not do well in English. I was a terrible speller and a terrible dictator, and I was never going to do anything in the English space. So the fact that I even published a book was a huge success for me, but more so publishing in the Lyme space and bringing light to those suffering and really helping people was even better. So I'm super excited about that. And I am just a busy bee. I'm a mom of 3, 1, 2, and 4. I have a full-time job as a VP of Strategic Innovation. So I work on hospitality development, from ground up builds to renovations. I oversee a team of 10 for our private hospitality management and ownership group. And then I also sit on the board of the Global Lyme Alliance, which is a huge passion for me. I was the gala honoree last year at the 2023 gala, and I hit my fundraising goal, was super excited about that, but moreover excited to get to meet new people in the Lyme space, especially internationally. And I'm very eager and very motivated to make big changes for GLA in the Lyme space and for the Lyme community overall. Hopefully increasing our funding to get more funding to research and getting answers for those suffering. And then additionally, I started my own nonprofit here locally called Impact 100 Orange County, which we give $100,000 grants to local nonprofits in the area to help just bring our communities out of underserved populations. So I'm super excited about all the things I do. I'm super blessed, and it is a miracle that my resume is where it's at from my experience with Lyme.
So let's talk about before the miracle, the time before the miracle, and what your life was like as a young child. And I don't want to focus on your health yet, because your Lyme disease journey did start during your childhood, but just tell us about what your childhood was like. Where'd you grow up, and what kinds of things were you thinking and dreaming about during your childhood?
Sure. I grew up in Southern California, Orange County, my whole life, so I've never really left. Obviously, I've traveled quite a bit, but never really left my hometown. And life was pretty bliss, I'd have to say. I was more of the person I am today than the majority of my life. I was very energetic. I'm a Leo. I love to connect with people. I love going out. I love a good party and excuse to dress up. I My passion was more in music and dance. I was more of an artsy kind of kid. I didn't really resonate with traditional education so more so, and I really loved just impacting people. I always felt like I was like the counselor of the group, trying to bring people up and stay motivated, and I was the cheerleader and like the song leader and all that pep. Always entertaining. Even when my parents had parties, they'd always laugh like, "Oh no, Kenzie, here she comes, like putting on another performance for our family, like our friends or family." And then, everything changed greatly. But as a young kid, I really was full of life and really enjoyed like the simplicity. I loved being outdoors, loved being in the water, would go to the beach a lot and spent a lot of time with my family. And my nanny, she was from Guatemala, so I had a lot of influence to the Latin culture as well. So that's kind of part of me too, which I love.
So what during this earlier phase of your childhood when you were discovering the artsy side of your creativity, what is it that you envisioned yourself doing?
My dream was to live in New York and be a Broadway dancer. Like that was what I wanted to do. If I wasn't going to be like famous for any one reason, I couldn't sing for the life of myself. So even though I was born in the same year of Taylor Swift, I wasn't going to fit in her shoes. But I definitely had the stage presence and the talent to dance and move. And so movement and expressing emotion through my body was just came natural to me. That's kind of how I got through a lot of my teen years. And I always wanted to go to Juilliard or, a top dance school, live in the city, and be on Broadway and just tour and just live my dream through dance.
So you had some challenges pretty early on in your life. I think you were as early as 9 or 10 years old when you started to have your health challenges. So why don't you share with us how that presented to you and your family?
Yes. So it wasn't as apparent to me right away, but definitely to my parents. Um, Something my mom always describes it as like her little bubbly girl, just like her lights were on and then like the light switch like flipped off and then it was just dark and she didn't recognize me like she used to. And it started slowly with uh, random like illnesses. Like I kept getting colds and like rashes and weird kind of physical issues, and that stuff we were just trying to deal with through medication or antibiotics or whatever, but it wasn't really helping. It was getting worse. And then she noticed a big decline in my ability to focus and pay attention and retain information in school, and then being able to communicate what I was learning at the level that other kids were doing that. And so I spent a lot of time kind of, in somewhat developmental classes trying to bring me up to speed at the same level other kids were learning, and I just wasn't learning as fast. So that was a big challenge for me. Granted, my brother, who is like an AP student, graduates with a master's from Notre Dame, like a double domer, like super smart in debate. I was the complete opposite. I could barely pass like an English class, for example, and my concentration just wasn't there. I kept getting an overflowing sense of anxiety every time I would have to present or do an essay or take a test, or any sort of like very minor level stress felt like the world was ending for me. And then started to become more and more fatigued, not wanting to go to school, trying to shy away from friends and social interactions. It was draining to be around people, which was not my natural personality whatsoever. And then it progressed even more into pain where I was competing. I was a dancer, I was competing, and I couldn't finish routines. And I would be in bed after practice for hours or just like sleeping all the way through halfway the next day. I couldn't get out of bed. And the doctors, because I was fortunate to have parents that were actively trying to figure out what was wrong with me. But the doctors, would normally say, oh, well, she's a teenager. My favorite was she's dramatic. She's depressed, she has anxiety, or, she's kind of making it up. She needs attention. Or maybe she's just working out too hard. But I was a teenager. It was like, my body should have been able to sustain it. I was also super healthy at that time, surprisingly, more so than I was as a kid, because I started to realize my body was reacting to certain things, and I was very cautious about that. So the decline at first felt gradual, and then it became more and more so as I hit like my teen years, and started going through puberty and my body changing and my hormones changing, and then everything changed. It was like I didn't recognize myself. And the depression got so bad that, I got to a point that I didn't think life was worth living anymore. And, I've even had that point after my diagnosis as well, but it was 9 or 10 years before I got an answer. So I suffered for 10 years just not knowing what was going on with me, and having, a rotating door of doctors telling me it was one thing or another, putting me on medications, putting me on hormones, trying to, alter my natural state just to get me through a time period that was just not natural for me. So it was a very dark time and not many answers, but definitely a learning time for me to be very self-aware about what was going on with my body.
So let's talk about the doctors first. How many different doctors did you see, and from what disciplines were these doctors from?
I don't remember the actual number because a lot of that process is such a blur to me. And my mother would be, as the caregiver, she was such a big influence in that space. But I mean, it was at least 20 to 30 doctors. I went to, traditional practitioners, to naturopathics, to homeopathics, to acupuncturist. And that was kind of later on when we started to do more natural. I went to neurologists, psychologists, psychiatrics. I was just trying anything. Like my parents were trying anything to just find what was wrong with me. And for a long time, they thought it was just hormones. And so I was on special hormone therapy. And then the psychiatric, they were more like, no, it's like more mental, mental illness. She really needs to get treated. She needs to get medication. She needs to like control her emotions because this is not natural. And that's why she's having all these phantom pains and headaches and concentration and brain fog. It's just because of the mental illness piece. So the mental illness was a big portion of probably the larger portion of my struggle. Pain and muscle fatigue and body aches and weakness was kind of something I had a high tolerance for, but the mental capacity, the mental illness piece, I didn't have a high tolerance for. I didn't like the feeling of being out of control of my emotions and not being able to figure out what was going on. That was like the biggest fear. But it was all different doctors. And it felt like as I went into one office and it was like a 3-hour appointment and cost $600, I would get very little out of it besides a bag that cost another $600 of supplements. And my counter was just full of supplements. And it was exhausting because I didn't know what was working. I was sick all the time too from taking supplements. I couldn't even eat enough to keep up with like the nausea from the supplement piece. And I potentially had allergies to what I was taking because there's, 14 plus things in one bottle. And then, I did detoxes. I did a slew of different things at the beginning of the diagnostic phase. That was just, lots of medication too. That was just very, very detrimental on my health overall.
So, Kenzie, one of the things that we've seen in every one of these podcasts is that overwhelming fatigue is one of the elements that everyone on this journey has. And I think that's pretty well developed, and everyone's really comfortable talking about that piece. But the other piece that we've seen with every one of these podcasts is that we find that our folks have a very sensitive trigger, meaning going from the parasympathetic expression of their nervous system to the sympathetic expression of their nervous system, or fight or flight, that trigger becomes very, very sensitive. Almost everything triggers you into fight or flight, and almost everything puts you in a position where your emotions are overwhelming, whether it be fight, flight, freeze, faint, or fawn. So it sounds to me like from the way you're describing this, you had a very, very sensitive trigger, and almost everything sent you into the sympathetic expression of your nervous system. So why don't you talk to us about that, and how your doctors were dealing with these extreme emotional responses you were having?
I love the way you put it, because it's true. There is triggers. And that's kind of part of the emotional journey as well, even on the healing path. And I think doctors became a trigger for me, even more so than dealing with, the emotions of my family. Like, my family didn't understand what was wrong with me. And they're like, can you just stop? Like, snap out of it, grow up. Like, what is, just communicate with us. And that was just heartbreaking. But then going to doctors who you're trusting and believe in and think that they have answers for you, and they don't. And there was times where I felt like they were making me sicker, trying to solve a problem I knew nothing about, looking back. And they were probably only doing the best they can, and I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. But I think that was a big trigger for me too. And they didn't know. I only had one physician tell me vulnerably that they didn't know what was wrong with me. And that was disappointing to me, because I understand being a physician and going through med school, and you have this professional degree, and people are trusting that you're making decisions based on, your education and what you understand about the human body. But no physician was vulnerable enough to be like, I don't know, or maybe I should recommend you to this person. They were more focused on solving the issue and it being under their umbrella. Like, the issue had to deal with them. Like, if it was neurological or if it was hormonal, it was like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. It's your thyroid, or this is what's going on. It's, it's depression, or whatever it may be. And those were all labels, and they wouldn't stop and say, look, I noticed you continue to go from doctor to doctor to doctor, and you're not getting answers. I'm seeing a pattern here. That was like the first time I had a physician, after this was probably 7 years into it, when she said, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I know it's not you. And based on the pattern, no child wants to go in and out of doctors that often, trying to seek answers. And obviously no parent wants to be dumping, endless money without answers. And so she was very transparent and very vulnerable with me. And I think I just broke down, and I was like, thank you. Like, thank you for listening to me. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep up with the routine with her, and I had to continue to seek a professional that specialized in the Lyme space, an LLMD. But that was like a really opening experience, that I was like, oh, finally, like, someone's actually being honest about, their ability. And that vulnerability actually created more respect for me, to that physician. And then I learned, and this kind of answers your question, but kind of digresses. I did learn that I have to be my own advocate with the physicians, because I was being triggered by them, and because I was being triggered by people's comments. I had to get educated and be my own advocate, for my health, to be able to make it through that dark time and to be able to empower myself with the right questions and not blindly trust a professional that I assumed was going to have my best interest in mind.
So, Kenzie, let's focus on that for a second, right? Because one of the things that we always want to help our folks with is to find out how they can be less fragile, right? Because you want to be anti-fragile when going through this process. And Lyme, which is an ancient bacteria which has evolved in a number of different, very sophisticated ways, is very good at breaking down our system. But Lyme disease recognizes that if it makes us emotionally fragile, if it makes our trigger very sensitive, that it is going to be immunosuppressive. And I believe that that's part of the way Lyme disease has evolved, or the Lyme bacteria has evolved, in a number of different ways, including the way it works with other microbes, right? So, but one of the things that you were able to do to combat the fragility that comes along with having very sensitive triggers is that you became competent. You learn more about yourself, you learn more about how to advocate for yourself, and you learn more how to communicate with doctors. So talk to us about how your competence made you less fragile and put you in a position where you were able to get better results when you're interfacing with your healthcare professionals.
So this might be a little difficult to hear, but I started going into appointments, and I'm going to just set the stage. This is like 7 years in, right? So I'm almost got my diagnosis. I still don't know what's going on. I kind of believe some other diagnosis, but from other things, and maybe it's a combination of things. But I started to question if the physician was correct. And I went in with less trust, which majority of us go in blindly trusting our doctors, right? And this is just in a global sense. I'm just talking kind of global. But I went in with less trust, and I said, you know what? There is a reason I'm dealing with this, and I want answers, and I don't have the strength to seek those answers. So I started to lean on my mom to help advocate for what I was feeling. So I became more vulnerable with her because I was also a teenager. So a teenage girl is not really sharing everything she feels with her mother, right? So I knew I had to seek help to also come in competent, that I couldn't communicate and get the words out appropriately to the physician, because they looked at me like, sometimes I felt they were looking at me like, she's just stupid. Like, she doesn't know what's going, like, she is incompetent, so to speak. But my mother, she was a professional. She came in, well-spoken. She was healthy. So they were listening to her. So I started to be vulnerable with her and sharing what I needed from her and asking for that support. And she would attend every appointment with me and take notes. And she was a very good note taker. And then I would look at those notes afterwards and start to put together patterns, because I wasn't able to process what the physician, like the doctors, were saying in the moment, especially 3 hours of like what they think is, MD jargon. And I would start going back and I'd be like, oh, interesting. Like that other physician, that other doctor mentioned that drug, or that other doctor said that, or I kept repeating this one thing that became like, what's your top symptom? I kept seeing this like repetitiveness. So utilizing her tools and her capabilities became making me more knowledgeable about what was going on with me, and also validated that it wasn't me, because obviously there's a part in your journey where you're like, you start believing like, maybe I am crazy. Like maybe I, like, depression is like taking over my body and it's causing all these problems. Or maybe anxiety, I'm going to be anxious for the rest of my life. Like, it is me. I'm the problem. And you start to become obsessed about that thinking. But I was fortunate that something bigger than me just told me, no, stop. Like, don't go there. Like, you gotta figure this out. And a portion of that, again, I was lucky because my mom was there to support me. So she obviously cared enough to say, hey, like, we're going to figure this out. Now, she didn't know how to. She didn't know how to navigate me. She didn't know the right answers. But at least someone cared enough to say, hey, it's worth the time. Like, we're going to put the time into figuring this out. And there's a whole story of burdening a caretaker too, but that's a separate thing. But to answer your question, I had to learn utilizing her tools. So I did have to ask for help. I had to be vulnerable. I had to get support. And I recommend anybody that's recently diagnosed or has chronic illness, you have to have your support system and have someone come with you and understand what you're going through in some capacity. And that's kind of why I wrote this book too, because many caregivers or friends or family around you, when you get a diagnosis, they don't know what Lyme disease is. And so and you don't really want to, you don't even know how to explain it yet. Maybe you're learning too. And so it's great to have the resources to be able to tell them, this is what I have. This is what I'm suffering with. I'm not sure what my plan is. I'm working on it. But if you could help me with this, even making a meal for me, doing a meal train, or coming to an appointment with me and taking notes because I don't even have the capacity to listen, or asking a question. So seeking help made me more competent and willing to continue to show up and listen to the feedback, even though I wasn't sure if I trusted all the feedback, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. So recently I listened to a podcast with a former CIA agent named Andrew Bustamante. He has a podcast named The Everyday Spy. And one of the things he recently taught was that at CIA, they do not believe there's something called confidence. Confidence cannot be measured. And his argument is that they believe it doesn't even exist. And it really is just a misunderstanding of what we really have, which is competence. Right? Confidence doesn't exist, but competence does exist. And when you were telling the story about how you became, your own advocate, you shared with us a sort of an action plan that you had taken where you needed someone to help you, in this case, your mom, deal with the issue of competence until you yourself became competent. You had to rely on her competence, and then you became competent. And when you became competent, you could advocate for yourself. So let's revisit what you just shared with us in the context of the way Bustamante argued this, which is that there's no such thing as competence. It's really just competence.
I love that. It's a mouthful. So let's see if I can say those two words in one sentence. No, I'm kidding. Very skilled. I've never heard that, but I would definitely agree with it. And more it just resonates currently in my career, because when you sit at the table educated, you naturally feel more confidence, right? And when you're armed with the facts and you're armed with the ability to respond, and you're prepared for the response, you don't feel like you showed up halfway. And so I would agree. I think education, advocacy, competence brings about competence and that natural growth, and knowing that, okay, now I'm becoming an expert in my space, so I'm more comfortable being open about it, and I'm more comfortable, not shying away from it.
So really what confidence is a base level of competence.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think that's great, and it's true in all different aspects of your life.
Another issue I'd like to explore with you is this concept of it's all in your head, or it's my fault. You said that you were feeling those emotions based on a number of different factors that you were dealing with. And one of the things that I find really frustrating about that perspective that's imposed on us in many cases by doctors is that when we interviewed Dr. Leo Shea, who's one of the top Lyme disease psychologists in the world, he argued that every single psychological symptom is actually, in fact, based in some physiological illness, and that it really that an expression of emotional illness has a root, and it is physiological. So it almost seems to me that when a doctor is imposing upon a patient this concept of it's all in your head, or it's your fault, really what the doctor is doing is saying, I don't know what's wrong with you. I can't figure out what the root is. So what I'm going to do is make myself feel better by giving you a label that allows me to be released from being creative and thoughtful and getting to the root of what is really going on with you. We're going to call your symptom your fault.
Yes. And it kind of, that dovetails back to what I was explaining too, where in that example, the doctor is not being vulnerable enough and not being honest enough to say, I don't know what is wrong. They're saying, well, because I don't know what is wrong, I'm going to blame you and say, well, maybe it's you. Maybe you're a problem, right? And
but remember, in saying that, Kenzie, again, and maybe it is some mental health issue, right? Really, but what they're really saying is, not only am I not brave enough to admit that I don't know what's wrong with you, I'm too lazy to try to get to the root. I'm going to call this symptom the disease rather than a symptom of the disease, which then imposes upon me the duty to figure out what it's a symptom of.
But could it be laziness or could it be competence? Like back to the fact that they're uneducated about, they really are, it's an unknown to them. Because the majority of physicians I go back to today, when I tell them about my story or they see me in passing or whatever, they're like, I've never heard of that. And they kind of like let themselves off the hook. Like, because they didn't know, it's like they don't feel bad, or like maybe because the system didn't teach them about something, they didn't have like the label for it. I don't know. I'm not a physician, and I thought about it. Trust me, I thought about it.
I think you're being kind. And the reason I think you're being kind is on this podcast, we've interviewed some of the pioneers, many of the pioneers in the Lyme disease space. Long before we even had a definition of what Lyme disease is, there were doctors like Dr. Burascano and Dr. McDonald here on Long Island who were treating patients before there was a treatment protocol. They were treating patients and diagnosing patients before there was a term. And they came up with treatment protocols. Why? Because they were well-trained as physicians, and as well-trained physicians, they were able to make observations about something that was new, and they were able to come up with a treatment plan because they were creative and because they were brave and then because they were courageous. They were willing to do this. So I quite frankly am not as kind as you, and I'm not willing to give all these doctors who claim they were not trained in Lyme disease a pass, because there were pioneers before this disease even had a label that were able to very successfully treat patients until, of course, the medical board shut them down for treating people the way they needed to be treated.
That's a shame. Yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, I understand what your perspective is. I think for me, I also want to be like, they're also humans, and even though they didn't serve me correctly, and I could be, really upset at them, and there's times I am, and there's times.
And I don't think that's going to serve you to be upset.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't serve me, but I think everybody has their limitation, right? And maybe that was the struggle for me. Is I was a unique case. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times, even when I got my diagnosis, and I knew what I had and I went to a specialist, I was still a unique case. I mean, because I've also had this bacteria take over my body for 10 years, and they're like, we don't even know what we're going to be cutting into, kind of thing, right? They don't even know what layer of the onion to peel. And this is back in 2009. I mean, protocols in anywhere in the West Coast were not existent, like non-existent. I didn't get diagnosed here in California. I got diagnosed in a different state. That's how weak the education and the confidence around Lyme disease was, and I still think it is today, unfortunately.
So Kenzie, let's talk about that, right? We've hinted now a couple of times that you were finally diagnosed, but before you got your diagnosis, did you suspect Lyme, or did any of your doctors suspect Lyme, or anybody in your family suspect Lyme disease before you finally got your diagnosis?
No, not that I remember. We did not suspect it or find it in our research. However, my situation was very godly. I'd like to share. My family's involved in this organization, this Catholic organization, and my parents do these, they go to these events, and I never go to them. And this one night, my dad was out of town and my mom was going to the event to support. And she said, "Hey, Kenz, do you want to come with me?" And she knows, like, I'm laid up in bed. She's like, the last thing I want to do is socialize with a person, because I didn't like I couldn't socialize at the time at all. I was fatigued by it, and scared. I had social anxiety. And she said, "There's a doctor speaking, and I know how much you love this stuff, because I became so obsessed learning about how to heal myself, mostly more with natural elements, not as much with like the traditional sense or the allopathic sense. I was really going alternative. So I was seeking a lot of alternative knowledge." So she said, this physician, he's somewhat alternative and allopathic, and I think you'd find it really interesting." And I said, "Okay, fine, I'll go with you." Like, I really more felt bad that she was going by herself. So I was like, "Well, you've done so much for me, I'll go for you and do this for you." And she didn't want to go by herself. So I go, and we're sitting there. I'm the only like kid. I mean, I really was a kid, but they're all adults. And Dr. Dino Pratt stands up, and he runs Envita Medical Clinic, and he is sharing about like what they're doing in Envita in Arizona, and about all these new treatments, and their successes with cancer patients. And then he talks about Lyme disease. And literally, I can remember this moment from that day. My mom was sitting there. I get chills thinking about it. And he started talking about it and listing the symptoms and the type of patients coming through his office. And I turn white, and I start to like tear up, and like I get very quiet. I wasn't talking or socializing anybody, but like I stopped breathing almost, to the point like I was stunned listening to this. I was like, "Oh my God, is he talking to me?" And I look at my mom, and I grab her hand, and she looks at me, and I said, "Mom, this is what I have." Like, I knew immediately. And I just started crying. And immediately after his talk, we went direct, like we bombarded him. And I've never done that in my life. And I'm even conservative about doing it today, because I know how crazy people are. But I bombarded him, and I was like, "I have this. I need to like figure," like we were just so emotional about it. And so that's when we suspected it. And then I went to Arizona, did a 3-day testing, and got my results about a month or so later.
We're going to have your doctor on this podcast in the next actually couple of weeks. So we're going to get his perspective on how crazy Kenzie came up to him at an event, what it was like from his perspective.
I wonder if he'll remember it. But it was so funny, because
I'm sure he will.
it was really outside of like his realm. Like, I don't really know why he was talking at this event, and it was more like religious, but they were doing some educational thing, and he was in California, but he's really in Arizona. It was a godly thing. It was like,
he was there for you.
Yeah, he was there for me. And I do believe that, and it's changed my life, and I've connected with so many people through it. And at the time too, you have to remember, what they're doing today was not what they were doing then. So I was also part of that growing process for Lyme, but they had a name for it, and that was a relief. You cheer and get so excited, right? You call it the epiphany, right? And then the next chapter kicks in.
All right, so let's pause there for a second. So you have this 10-year journey where you're chronically ill. Despite being a young adult, you're so sick that you're not out, at all. You have no social life. It's so bad that your mom is just dragging you to a Catholic, a Catholic lecture that only old people like I go to. And there you are meeting the person that helps you to get the diagnosis, which has now led you to so many really wonderful things as a result. So give us that little piece before Matt takes you through the diagnosis, and what you did after the diagnosis. So you now knew in your spirit that you had a diagnosis. You now tell me about, how that affected you emotionally, and how that helped you to get to Envita, so you can go for the testing that would confirm your diagnosis?
Sure. So let me paint a picture for a minute here. I'm a senior in high school and I go to this event, right? So then when I knew that was it, like there was a piece of me that just was solidified without a diagnosis, but I had to obviously prove it. We set a time to go to Arizona. I've never been to Arizona in my life. And we do this 3-day thing. It was very invasive, cutting pieces of my hair, blood sample, like you name it. They got it from me. They could totally take my identity. And I'm finishing up school and I'm going off to college, and it was really difficult to get into school for me. I had to really step up my game junior and senior year to the point where I had, just an undescribable anxiety and stress that put me in debilitating situations on top of that.
But you were able to grit through all that and get into a great school. You went to Purdue, right?
Well, yes, I started at Chapman though. So I started at Chapman. I didn't get to Purdue until after my treatment. So I started at Chapman, which is a great school in Orange. And I'll never forget the first day of school. I was like, I'm not going to survive this. And I had to drop out. And I want to be a college student. I've been in high school, right? And high school sucked. And I was like, okay, I'm ready for the next chapter. And I was too ill and I had to drop out. And then I got my diagnosis this summer going into my freshman year of college, and then ended up having to drop out, going to Arizona, living there with my mom for 3 months. My boyfriend, who is now my husband at the time, I told him like, hey, not going to work. Bye. Go find a girlfriend that you can marry and because that's not going to be my life. I'm like now going to go off to Arizona and deal with this chronic illness. And I didn't know what that meant. Right. So I kind of tried to cut all ties. And he was a sweetheart and he's been a rock for me. And he said, I'll be here waiting for you. So I'm very blessed. But I left school, but I didn't want to fall behind in school. My parents are educators and they've started schools and teachers and everything else. And so school was very important to them. So I was going to school online and I got my bachelor's in holistic medicine because I was studying what I was dealing with. I wanted to find more answers. I was still untrusting of doctors. And that was a really difficult time having to drop out of college. I never got the college experience. I never got the real high school experience. I never built those social skills with younger adults. And I still struggle to this day, but I think I do a pretty good job with just general small talk. Like it was hard.
Whoa, Kenzie, I just have to say something here, okay? So for everybody, I'm going to throw myself under the bus here. I was about 5 minutes late to the podcast. I was on my phone in my car driving home. So me and Kenzie had a nice chat offline just to get to know each other for the first 5 minutes while I was driving home. And at the end of the 5-minute conversation, I said, oh my goodness, Kenzie, you're an amazing public speaker. I can't wait to start this podcast. And your response was, really? I never thought that. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, are you kidding me? So the fact that you're saying this, the contrast here is just so great. So I just had to weigh in with that little anecdotal story. I'm sorry, please continue.
No, thank you. Well, I guess that's something I need to be, grow on is my my respect for self, because it's something I've worked really, really hard on, is to be able to communicate effectively and efficiently with people, because I just lost that such a period of my time. I didn't talk to anybody for years, and it's just, there's a skill there, right? So thank you.
So I want to put this into context, Kenzie, as well, right? So let's focus in this snapshot of time. You're 18 years old. It's a pivotal time in your life. You're graduating high school. You've been sick. High school is not a good experience. You're going to try to go to college. You have to drop out pretty quickly. And you're just getting your diagnosis the summer between high school and college. Before we get into that, your diagnosis and your treatment, just give us an idea of how sick you were. So obviously the psychological impact, we know that Lyme disease causes psychological symptoms. It's proven. It is a symptom of Lyme. Plus, when you're that sick, who wouldn't be depressed, right? But it's also a symptom and it gets compounded. I mean, I tell people, I never had anxiety my whole life. When I got Lyme, I couldn't believe I had my first panic attack. And I thought I was dying. I didn't know what was going on, right? So that's real. So in addition to your psychological symptoms, what were some of your physical symptoms you had as well? You mentioned fatigue, but give us some details about your symptoms you had.
Sure. The fatigue was so bad, I really couldn't get out of bed. Like even thinking about lifting my body felt like 1,000 pounds. It was just like laying there, and no matter how much I would try to tell my brain to just lift my arm, I couldn't do it. And then I would have headaches, even in dark, like in dark moments, or I would get up and I would feel faint and have to like lay back down. So I had a lot of like unequilibrium with like my blood pressure and my blood sugar. It was always like off. And even no matter if I ate, small intervals or whatever they told me to do, I was always kind of like in this dizzy space. I also had a lot of joint pain, especially in my knees and ankles. And I was hard, obviously, being a dancer, I was hard on my body. So I probably had some additional inflammation, but when Lyme kind of took over, it became like unbearable. Like I couldn't kneel at all, even getting down, crouching down to pick something up. I couldn't even get up. I had to sit down and then like roll over and try to find a way to get up. I felt like I was just, very, very frail and weak. I wasn't able to like keep up with my normal workout routine. I would be like winded and had like heart palpitations and felt like I was gonna like pass out or throw up. I had a lot of stomach issues. Like anything I ate, it was like, obviously now I can tell like gluten and dairy are definitely flares for me. But at the time, it didn't really matter what I ate. If I ate like the healthiest thing or I had a green juice, I would have bloating, cramping, stomach pains, like irregular bowel movements, which also made high school really uncomfortable because it was like I couldn't really navigate that, experience. With having to go to the bathroom and, trying to be in class and balancing that. And then I had issues with my sight. My vision got really bad when I had Lyme, and it was interesting. After treatment, my vision went 20/20, which was like creepy. Now it's like starting to get worse again. But I remember like specifically my vision started going even at like 9 years old, and I had to have glasses. It was weird. I've had a lot of oral issues, which I never related to Lyme. I didn't really know that was related, but in my experience and research now, there's a lot to do with like the mouth and the Lyme bacteria. I had issues in Arizona too, with my mouth when I got treatment, and I had a reaction and the whole thing happened. But I thought that was something, I never knew that was a symptom or a parallel. But I've had like rotting in at my mouth, even though I have good dental care and like hygiene. I have like less teeth than the average person because I had to keep having teeth pulled and removed. I've had braces like 4 times. It was just kind of really odd stuff that I didn't ever relate to Lyme. I had an abscess tooth that like swelled up my whole face. And again, it was like kind of just a weird thing. I get the flu every year, even with the flu shot. I got a cold every year, no matter how often. I was a weak body, and I had a weak, immune system. I was just weak all around. And to the point, like the depression, anxiety, my anxiety got so bad, I would not step foot in an elevator because I felt so claustrophobic. I wouldn't step foot on a plane. I got anxiety thinking about traveling anywhere. And granted, my family they were big travelers. We'd go, to New York all the time or other places. My dad's from Michigan. So traveling was part of our life. And if I knew that we were going to be traveling somewhere for months, I would be anxious about it, like sick to my stomach. Like it was just terrible. So debilitating anxiety whenever it came to interacting, public speaking, small spaces, like just kind of almost obsessive thinking about certain circumstances and situations. And that was probably one of the hardest things for me because I loved being around people, but I was so anxious about being around people. So I was like dying inside, not being able to do that.
So after the 10-year window, you're 18, you go in the summertime to Dr. Dino Prato in Arizona at Envita, right?
Yep.
And you test positive for Lyme and co-infections, I believe, that summer?
Yes, all of it.
Do you recall which co-infections?
I don't recall. This is also in 09, so we're in like 24 now. But I remember when they gave me, like, so they called me because I went home and they were like, hey, you have Lyme, and you know, this is what's kind of going on. They were going over my CD57 and all this stuff. And then I didn't really understand any of that, by the way, like what that meant at the time. And I'm still kind of even educating myself more because they're doing a lot more in the testing space. I did culture my Lyme, so it wasn't the traditional testing. They sent my blood to Germany and they cultured it and it was positive. And then I was positive for like 6 of like the 9 co-infections they tested at the time. I know it was like over the ratio number. And it was funny when I went there, they were even educating me at that time. They were like, you know, some of these co-infections are probably a bigger issue than Lyme itself. But Lyme is kind of like the umbrella name for all of these tick-borne illnesses. And so that's kind of what we were gonna, you know, navigate. But it was that was kind of something I was trying to learn too.
So did you put off treatment to go to college, or were you treating when you started college and had to drop out?
Yeah, so I started college without making the decision to do treatment because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I was like, well, Mom, maybe I can like fight through this, right? Because I've been fighting for 10 years. So it's like, now what? And so I went to college and then I just couldn't do it. I ended up finishing the semester because I push through a lot. So I finished the semester and then ended up leaving. And then that's when we made the decision, like I needed to go get treatment. And at that point we left, I got treatment after that semester.
Did you
And
say
then,
that you went back to online school to get your bachelor's in holistic health at the same time?
yes. So
So in
I actually
parallel, you're treating
started,
aggressively for Lyme, and you went back to school online to get a bachelor's in holistic medicine, right?
yes, I'm a little bit of an overachiever. Yes. Yes.
So can you walk us through what treatment protocol you are now doing? You're back home, you go to Arizona, you're treating with Dr. Dino Prato at Envita, you're taking online courses to get a degree in holistic medicine. What's the treatment protocol you begin with, and how did you respond to it?
Yeah. So we lived there for 3 months in a 2-bedroom apartment. Lots of fun stories there. And I had a PICC line and I vulnerably, like my mother had to bathe me every night because I couldn't get my arm wet and it was very difficult. I got much sicker during treatment than I was before. And that was at the time they told me was part of the process because there was a die-off and a Herxheimer reaction. I was getting everything from 3 different antibiotic IVs to high-dose vitamin C, hydrogen peroxide, oxybosh. I was doing 20 different supplements and 2 different detox powders. I was doing enemas every day. Ozone, I had to do like I had to get ozone shots in my jaw because I had systemic infection that came up, like I was mentioning before, in my mouth, which at the time we didn't understand the relation, but now makes a lot of sense that it was probably linked to one of the Lyme bacterias that was living in my mouth. And I did infrared sauna as well. So I was doing all that I was in a chair from about 8 a.m. to 5 to 5:30 p.m. Sometimes they let me out on Friday around like 4. And then the weekend I'd rest and recover and then go back to it Monday during the day. And so during the day, I would be online doing independent study, which I'm proud to say I graduated summa cum laude, straight A's.
Congrats.
Online school, and I was like one of 15 in a group of over 500 students that did straight A summa cum laude. So I was very smart. Who knew?
Well, the fact that you did that while undergoing treatment and being so sick, I can't even imagine. When I was at my worst, I couldn't even speak. Never mind think about taking courses. So that just shows your perseverance and your drive. So kudos, truly. Now, Envita is an interesting place because we've had a lot of people talk about it. The one that comes to mind is we had a heavy metal artist who was an international artist from Canada who traveled all around the world and was a very successful artist who went to Envita and had great success and talked about like the really rigid structure of treatment, how you go through a wide variety of protocols as you described. And there was one that was a combination of an insulin modulating drug, I believe in combination with antibiotics. Does that sound familiar? Is that something they did with you while you were there?
No, I didn't do that while I was there. No.
Okay.
Not that
So,
I-
yeah, and overall, she said it was a really good experience and it really got her health back. I mean, I'm going to kind of jump ahead. Do you think Envita was a good place for you? Would you recommend it to people listening to this podcast? I know it's really expensive. It's a big commitment. You have to live there essentially, either on site or on campus or somewhere close, right? But was it worthwhile? Do you think it actually was an important part of your healing journey?
Yes, but I do have, in full disclosure, they did want me to stay longer and I could not do it. At 3 months, I looked like death. Like I couldn't do it anymore. And I was probably pushing myself. And I think again, in '09, we were also trying to figure out more about what modalities would kill Lyme or kill like, the co-infections. And so I felt a little bit at that time, we were still in the learning phases and I was a little bit of a guinea pig at the start of that time. Now treatment's greatly changed because I talked to, patients that have been treated in the past 5 years and it looks different than even I went through. Even the antibiotic choices are different. And, but I do believe and I do think it was part of my healing journey. I had to do something. I had to do something drastic to make a change, even if it didn't completely cure me or heal me. I think it kickstarted the ability that I knew I could get to that point. And I ended up, feeling better than I was, but obviously that wasn't the end for me. I had to go through 2 more rounds of treatment.
But Kenzie, you said at the end of the 3 months you had to leave because you were so unwell and so sick. So were you feeling better at the end of that 3 month window?
Well, I was very sick, but I knew some of the symptoms were better. Like my body was just too weak. I'm probably not doing the best.
No, you answered that really well. And I'm asking you that because I think it's an important concept, right? You recognize that some of your symptoms are either A, better, or B, gone, but you were still really sick because
I was still sick. I was weak.
Right, you were still very weak. And the reason I ask you this is when I reflect back on my own journey, and many people that we have in this podcast reflect back, I always ask, what would you do differently, right? And one of the ones I feel very strongly about in my own personal experience was I would want to strengthen my body before aggressive kill treatment first, right? And I didn't do that. And I think it was a fundamental flaw in my healing journey that would have maybe been a better step and I would have been able to get better quicker if I did that, right? So you were immune compromised, you were getting sick all the time. I mean, it was clear your immune system was tanked, and it was clear physically and emotionally your body was just drained. And then you jumped into pretty aggressive kill protocols. And there was detox tools too, you mentioned, right? But I just wonder if you maybe looking back would have focused more on repairing your body, strengthening your immune system, strengthening your gut health, strengthening your liver, strengthening your nervous system, balancing out that fight or flight, as Rich described, because you were in constant fight or flight, probably about all things, travel and health, et cetera, built up your body foundationally, and then went into a more strong kill protocol. I mean, what do you think about that?
100%. You said it. Looking back, that would have been the best thing because I probably would have been, the treatment would have been more successful. But I basically was already, halfway dead. And then it was just like going in to kill the rest of me. And then at the end of it, I felt so weak and frail. I couldn't walk. I had to go to PT in a pool to just get my, my ability back to move my legs and my arms and carry something that was 10 pounds. I was so frail and so sick. And frankly, to a point that it wasn't healthy, right? It was the killing helped with a variety of symptoms. My anxiety was better, my mental clarity was better, my focus, but I was in bed still. And so, yeah, you're totally right. My body was already weak going into it. And I wish I was stronger.
So walk us through what happens next. I mean, you're obviously learning a lot in your course. You're top of your class, super brilliant, getting this degree in holistic medicine. What are you doing after the 3 month window? You go home, you can't even walk, you're going to PT in a pool to learn, to strengthen your body. What's coming next in your healing journey? And are you still treating with the doctors at Envita remotely, or are you pivoting to a new care team at this point?
So at that point, I was still getting counsel from Envita doctors because I wasn't sure if I was going to be going back, but I just needed a break. That's kind of what was in my head. I was like, I just need a break. This is a lot. And I was away from my like my other family, like my dad wasn't there and my friends, and I was missing a lot. That was also the mental piece of it too, right? So that's another hard piece of like when you're going into treatment for any chronic illness, it's also making sure you're balancing the things that fulfill you mentally too. That I wish I did more of. I shied away from making any connections because I almost shut off the world, and that wasn't healthy for me either. But I still getting counseling from Envita. I continued education online. I stayed at home and continued to just kind of strengthen my health personally. As you mentioned, I was going to school for this, so I started doing a lot of holistic healing. I was doing like yoga and body strengthening with my own weight and lots of supplements, and then started really kickstarting a healthy diet. And I think that was a big pivot for me. And then I'm trying to remember what the next wall that hit. There was two, and I remember my wedding was one of them. And when I got proposed to, and I was planning this wedding, it stressed me out so bad. I had a relapse of my Lyme, and all the stuff started to flood back in my body, and I became like debilitated again.
Was this around the same time, or was this down the road? Because I'm just curious.
Down the road.
Down the road. Okay.
Down the road. So, man, chronologically, we're talking. I was married in 2014, so I was like proposed in 2012. So about like 2013, I had another episode. So I was diagnosed 2009, get treatment, trying to do better. I know I got some, and then I got my second round of treatment in about 2013.
So about 20, you got diagnosed in around 2009. So about 4 years later, you got your second round of treatment, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it was all with Envita still, so there was no other
No,
practitioners?
I actually, so great question. I did not go back to Envita because at that time now I was engaged and I wanted to stay local, and I just didn't want to like be far away.
Kenzie, can I back up for a sec? Apologies. I just want to make sure I don't want to miss pieces here. So what, this is your second round of treatment, but you're engaged and it sounds like you're doing a lot better. So is that correct? You sound like you made even more progress than when you left and your body needed to be rebuilt, correct?
I definitely made progress. I made life changes and choices that got me to a space that I was functioning, like I would say high functioning. I graduated school. But I still had like some lingering symptoms, but not like to me, I could deal with it. Like, minor aches and pains, fatigue here and there. Maybe I needed a weekend to sleep, and rest. And I just kind of knew that was just going to be part of my life. So that was kind of the 4 years.
Right. Now, in that 4-year window, can you think of some of the tools that were the most helpful in your either short-term or long-term healing journey, right? If you had a symptom or a flare, what was the tool that really helped you? Or what's something that you think really helped get you to where you were at the end of that 4-year window from a healing standpoint?
So financially, I used Dr. Rawls' protocol, the supplement protocol. That was very helpful for me.
The Restore Kit?
Yes, the Restore Kit.
We're huge fans, if you don't know that. Rich and I both take the Restore Kit. I think it's been, huge in my healing journey, and we love Dr. Rawls, so I'm happy to hear that.
Me too. I love him. So that was really helpful for me. That was like very low impact. That was another thing I had to go into it with, like, I didn't want any more like IVs. I didn't want all these attachments. Like it felt too invasive. And I think that was why I got very weak. So I wanted something that was very digestible, so to speak. So I could take supplements. So I did the Restore Kit. I was very adamant about that. I was very strict about a gluten-free, anti-inflammatory diet. And
Did you do the Rolls diet that came with the Restore kit? Were you that strict?
no, I just was kind of generally gluten-free. I didn't do any like really, I mean, I was also, I'm in my like early 20s, you know? I
Yep.
didn't really drink. I was like pretty, conservative and very holistic at the time, but still I wanted to like enjoy sugar here and there, which that was my biggest fall. So I was gluten-free and dairy-free for the most part. And then I also, water was huge for me doing a PT in the pool. That was very helpful because I realized my body was in more pain when I was outside the pool, just from gravity pushing, like it was just like weight, and I didn't have the ability to like hold it up. Like I just wasn't physically strong enough. So I think PT in the pool and just getting in water. I was lucky my parents had a pool, so I'd get in their pool and just kind of relax. It was like a weight lifted off me whenever I got in the pool. I was like, the pain. So I would say water was really helpful, in baths, hot baths, Epsom salt baths for detoxing. And I continued to do enemas as well. So that was all very affordable care.
So tell us about the second part of your healing. So now you're 4 years in. I think you said around 2014-ish, or I'm losing track of time here, or 2013-ish, and
Yeah.
you're going to go into round 2. So where do you go for that?
Yeah. So I don't know the exact year I started treatment, but I actually ended up going to Dr. Bhakta here in Orange County. She at the time was kind of an LLMD. She was treating Lyme patients. She was doing something called PK protocol. She was doing IV antibiotics.
Is the PK protocol the Patricia Kane protocol?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And so I started the IV antibiotics because I was back to that place almost where I couldn't get out of bed. I had the debilitating chronic fatigue, the brain fog, the anxiety, debilitating anxiety, not just like, oh, I'm anxious. Like I couldn't leave the door. I was so anxious, and a lot of chronic pain. So I ended up going back to her, and she started kind of a different regimen, not as invasive. And the one nice thing is I got to get treatment locally. So I got to live at home and stay at home and get the care I needed there.
So give us some more. So tell us what exactly she was doing with you to treat, right? Because I want to get, if you don't know, it's fine, but what specific tools she was using, whether it's herbs, whether it's supplements, whether it's antibiotics, whether it's, binders, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm not very keen on remembering every little detail of that treatment. Again, I felt like during treatment was kind of a blur. But I remember we did the PK protocol. I remember she was doing doxycycline, and another antibiotic, and I'm blanking on the name, but she was like interchanging them based on the hatching cycle, which I thought was really interesting, where in Envita at the time, it was the same antibiotic every day. Hers was like, okay, we're going to take doxy for like 9 days or 10 days, and then we're going to switch to this other like cephalophysis or something. I don't know. Like, I don't know the name of it, but that was really interesting. And I think actually made a difference. And
yeah, we've heard from other guests that the combination therapy of various antibiotics is far more effective than a singular antibiotic. In fact, even studies that are done by research institutions, even the federal, the CDC, they're showing that when you have severe cases, combinations of 2 to 3 antibiotics or more can be effective. And there are specific ones that are helpful for Lyme at the various phases, right? The stages of Lyme. Is it a stationary phase? Is it an active phase? And ones that are more effective for co-infection. So I think that the diversity of antibiotics was deeper in eliminating and eradicating the wide variety of pathogens you got from whatever tick bites you may have had in your life.
Yes. And I definitely noticed the difference in that. And it was interesting too, like I'm sure other patients will experience, or if they're not educated yet, when you take a certain antibiotic, it would kind of create its own symptoms. So like I had an antibiotic that made me a little more crazy. you know what I mean? Like I'd have a reaction or I'd feel like a little bit more on edge and like crazy. And I felt like really jittery or really itchy. And then another antibiotic would make me feel like kind of more mental fog and like the die off. And then I would have like weird twitches, you know? So the antibiotics did almost pinpoint different killing agents or, you know, killing different colonies. I thought that was kind of interesting looking back too, because I journaled a lot of that, the feeling sense of like, what was my body feeling? Like I felt like this buzzing sense or like the creepy crawlers.
Yeah, and I think the cool part about what I'm hearing for this protocol that you had was the antibiotics were super effective at killing, right? And now the Patricia Kane protocol or the PK protocol, I understand it to be more of a detox protocol as well. It's a lot of natural things, and I just Googled it because I know I can never pronounce the name. It's phosphatidylcholine and sodium phenylbutyrate, and pushes the glutathione, which we all know, folic acid, and there's some other things, but essentially they increase intake of essential fatty acids, but it's supporting your body to detox all of your key organs to detox. And if you're killing off all these things, you have to support getting all this stuff out of you, so you're not going to become toxic. And I think that's a nice combination here that you're describing.
Yes. So I had the antibiotics that were killing. I had extensive rashes. You could see like almost like these spider veins of rashes. I did the PK protocol. It was like a 14-week protocol. I would do suppositories and I continued the enema. That was kind of always something like part of my detox routine, as well as the baths. Those always seemed to be easy to do and were like very effective. And then it was the restore, right? So it was the kill, detox, and then the restore piece is when you take antibiotics. Even though I had IV antibiotics, I still had a lot of gut issues. And so I had to repopulate the gut. And so I was doing a lot of probiotics, prebiotics, high fiber diets. I was taking these powder shakes to make sure I was getting like an enormous amount of good colonies for my gut. And it took about, I would say, almost close to 3 years to get my gut to a place where I felt normal. And the only time, like supplements didn't do it. Like, I'll be honest, for me, supplements didn't do it. The shakes didn't do it. The only thing that got my gut back to where it was is I did FMT, and that changed everything. So
can you explain what FMT is and
yep, it's fecal microbial transplant, and it's allowed in California. It's legal for people that have C. diff, which is a dysbiosis of the gut. And I kind of went, and I'll be honest, I went on the black market, so to speak, because I was doing research on this. And my gut was not healed. And the gut was also creating issues with my brain fog that I think was semi-related to Lyme, but I also think it was like this gut-mind connection. And no matter how healthy I ate, getting rid of the gluten and dairy, I still was having this like disconnect with my stomach. I mean, I was hospitalized for stomach pains like multiple times, like within my life. So I knew the gut was something I had to heal, like post-treatment. And so I did a lot of research on FMT, found someone that did it for me in LA. It was a 10-day treatment, which is basically an enema. I did the enema, not the capsules, of cultured fecal. And the specific type of fecal came from a population in England, from a clinic that they take on fecal there from a certain population that eats like over the group of people they eat over 40 fruits and vegetables a day. So their like colonies are like super nutritious, super high fibrous, like just the ultimate gut essentially. And then so they would take the fecal, freeze it, and then they would ship it. And then I did treatment here, and I did a 10-day treatment. And it was the craziest thing. I've never experienced symptoms like that either. One day I was craving like hot, like spicy food and beer. I don't drink beer. I hate it. And I don't like spicy food, but I was craving it because it was so amazing how impactful someone's bacteria in their gut is to their mind and like what they like and what they want. And so that was a huge change. After I did my round of FMT, I did a very strict diet for about it was supposed to be for like 6 months. I probably did about 6 months of a very strict diet. High fibrous, lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of variety, low in dairy and red meat, unless it was cultured or grass fed. So, you know, the whole 30 kind of almost. And like no fried food and no antibiotics. That was like the one key thing. I could not take anything that would kill the colony. So I was very strict whenever I got sick, which I got colds here and there. I would never take anything. I would make my body fight it naturally. And I do that still today, because I got a cold this beginning of the year and I took a Z-Pack and I noticed immediately, I was like, ah, dang it. Like that stupid Z-Pack. Now I'm like craving sugar and I want, like, need the caffeine and I'm lethargic, and I noticed the shift. So I'm very sensitive to antibiotics and I avoid them today like the plague. But that was kind of my journey with FMT at the time.
Isn't it wild how you can take an antibiotic and all of a sudden you're craving sugar and you weren't before? I mean, the correlation of what the antibiotic does to your gut by depleting microbes, good microbes, and disrupting the balance of microbes in your gut, and then how that correlates to cravings in your brain to have sugar is a really fascinating combination of things, right? Yeah. And, you know, we know that the gut health is at a minimum, it makes you more susceptible to chronic Lyme. If you don't have a pretty diverse set of bacteria in your gut, you are more susceptible to chronic Lyme. And in addition to that, you know, we love following studies like this out of Northeastern. I think it was last year, they put out a paper about intestinal bacteria could give doctors an objective test for chronic Lyme. And I'll kind of jump to an interesting part that relates to, you know, your gut health and the microbes in your gut, that people with chronic Lyme have 2 distinct differences in their microbial levels compared to other normal groups. They have an abundance of a type of bacteria called Blautia, Blautia, and a suppression of a type of bacteria called bacteroides, Bacteroides. And this was consistent across all chronic Lyme patients, right? So when you're seeing that in their gut microbiome, they have an abundance of one that is unusual in your normal patient study, or I should say your control study of normal people, and you have a suppression of another. That's a huge indicator, right? What does that mean? And they're still studying that to this day, but I think there's a lot of things we're going to learn by studying the gut that are going to help the chronic Lyme community and the chronic illness community in general. And you're not the first person, although you described it the best, in my opinion, to talk about fecal implants, because I think there's a lot of value there to bring a diverse set of, you know, you have billions of types of strains of bacteria in your gut. And when you do a really healthy sample and you put that back into you, you're giving your body a fighting chance and jumpstarting it to be able to do all the things it needs to do because of the connection between your gut and your brain and your immune system, right? It's really sort of like the control center, I feel like, right? I mean, so it's really fascinating, and I digress, but I just wanted to kind of weigh in on my views on that as well.
Yeah, I'm a huge, huge supporter of FMT. I wish more people can do it. I think for me, I felt like it was very non-invasive. I didn't have a lot of symptoms from it, but only benefits from it. So I think it was great. I'm a huge supporter.
So what else did you do? Well, I guess you said there was 2 times, right? So you got engaged before your wedding, you went back. This gave you the rebound you needed. And then it sounds like at this point you got married. Walk us through that part of your life, Kenzie. And then, you know, I think there was a third, and if I'm mistaken, you can correct me. I think there was one more time you had to go back, right? Okay.
No, Matt, you're falling better than I am. Jeez. Okay. So then I had to go through treatment because I had another relapse. And at the time, I was with Bacta still as well. But this time I did just hydration, and I was doing a more mild antibiotic at the time. And I'm slipping on the antibiotic name. That's not my strong point, but I got to do it at my house. So I had another PICC line in. My PICC line got infected, long story short. So I've had a lot of PICC lines. And I was doing a mild antibiotic. I was getting treatment done at my house. And I don't know what the antibiotic was, but it didn't really seem to be doing anything. And then I just kind of like after 2.5, 3 months, I think it was, because I think I was supposed to be on it for 3 months, I was kind of done. I was like, you know what? Like, I'm done with treatment. I'm giving up, because I kind of had these continuously cycle relapses, but then I was like feeling really strong, and and to be a little bit ahead of myself, one thing I wish I learned is just because I was feeling strong didn't mean I got to do everything I could. Because I was like, oh well, now I'm gonna like eat a little bit of this, and then I'm gonna like do a little bit of this, and maybe I'll stay up late one night, and then I started breaking down that very strict routine that I had, and that's what also continued to weaken my immune system and potentially cause that relapse, right?
Yeah. So Kenzie, you're making me think. So Rich and I, in our minds, right? This is something we try to use in our own healing, and we talk to other people about, and we're going to talk more about in the future. But you're kind of indirectly outlining our approach to healing, and I want to get your thoughts on it, right? So there's 4 stages, and we kind of hinted at it earlier. We have the prehab, or the prehabilitate phase, which is basically build your body up before treatment, right? You got to strengthen your body, open up your detox pathways, drainage pathways, rebuild your liver, your nervous system, your emotional health, all that stuff. The assist, which is going to be, the A phase, the assist, which is basically assist your immune system to treat Lyme. And that's also the kill phase. You can combine that with antibiotics, herbals, whatever. That's really more the kill phase of get rid of all the pathogens that you have, Lyme and whatever else, because it's never just Lyme disease. And then the rehab phase, which is, all right, you kind of touched on this, right? When I did all the antibiotics, but my gut was destroyed. So I did fecal implants to help rehab my body. And that was a huge step for you. But then again, after that round, you had a third wave where you had to go back and treat because you kind of went back to an unhealthy lifestyle. And that's the phase that I think a lot of us struggle with when we get to that part, which is the maintenance phase, right? We have to enter a maintenance mode to prevent a Lyme relapse. And you used the word, I had a relapse again, right? And I think if we aren't rigid in our maintenance phase of our healing journey, then we're more likely to have a relapse. And we call it PARM, P-A-R-M. It's our acronym for healing. Can you give us your thoughts on it? Because it's something we just kind of came up with for fun, but you're really touching on it without us even really addressing it. I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Loving Parm right now. Totally. The rehab was definitely something, or the prehab was something I totally missed with my treatment. So it was really difficult to get through that healing phase. And then, the assist was totally part of the process. That was the easy part, right? Like the killing and the treatment. The rehab was not as easy because the majority of the physicians weren't sure how to repair the body after the fact. They only knew how to like really kill until later on. And they're like, oh yeah, we got to detox, and then we got to support. And like, what does that support look like? And it might look different for everybody. For me, my gut was destroyed and my body was weak. So I needed support through nutrition, and I needed proper support through FMT. And FMT again, like changed my life. But then having to go through antibiotics again, which I was really resilient to do, I just didn't want to do it. And then ended up killing off that colony and having to do FMT again, because this time I knew going into it that worked and that repaired something that I needed. And then from there, I knew the maintenance was key. And I do other treatment, for maintenance today. Not, FMT is expensive. It's hard to get covered by insurance, and it's not covered in many states, or allowed in many states. So I just want to be fully transparent about that. And then I also I do I'm blanking on the name and I can't believe that. Okay, it'll come back to me. But I do other treatments that really support my overall fatigue and energy and my mental capability, especially my chronic pain, because chronic pain has always been something I haven't really totally gotten rid of. And I think it is because I'm missing that piece of the maintain, right? I'm missing the continued PT because I have to make the time to do that. And my life is not allowing me to make that time. And so I live in that space of pain. But then I know that. I'm like, Kenzie, you need to do this if you're going to get that benefit. So that's really important to me.
I can relate to that very much. And I think it's really cool to see you being able to make those kind of connections, right? About where you're at in your healing journey and understanding why and how that occurred, right? So Rich is going to jump in after this question, but is there anything else that we missed from a treatment standpoint that you want to share? Because Rich has got to talk to you about, I mean, you authored 3 books. One, you talked about the Lyme book. We're going to jump into that. We're going to talk about you founded your own holistic health company, Holistic Umbrella. You are on the board of directors of the Global Lyme Alliance. And I mean, that's a really cool story about you going to New York City and joining GLA and then being awarded last year at their gala. So before Rich takes over and goes into that part of this discussion, is there anything you want to share that we missed when it comes to a successful part of your healing journey, or a warning, right? Don't do this. And anything you want to share with our listeners who are struggling to heal right now?
Yes. The one thing I remember, the one treatment that's really been an impact for me, again, not super accessible because it's expensive, but ketamine treatment. I don't know if that's something you've talked about on your podcast before, but has been very beneficial for me in overall chronic pain as well as mental health. And that has really pivoted the way I think about the world, like in general. I know that sounds like a big concept, but getting into a space, I was never a kid that did drugs or, drank or much. So I was very nervous and very anxious about trying this treatment. But when I was recommended it and I did it the first time, it was kind of an odd feeling. I was just very numb and lethargic. The second time, I really got into a headspace that really put life into perspective and allowed me to understand that where I was at in the world is okay. And that was something I really needed in my life. I needed to know it was okay that I'm still in a healing process. And that because I still mentally was stuck in this space that I had to be well to be successful. And it's not true. We're kind of all going through this cycle in life. And there's times in my life I wasn't well, or there's days I don't feel my best, and that's okay. And that ketamine got me to that perspective sense. And obviously having kids and growing and maturing and, getting confident and building, my life and my career, I don't want to lose that. So the maintain piece now is the most important piece. And part of that maintenance piece is making sure my mind is very healthy. And I steer away from negative people, negative energy. I really am blessed. I'm positive. I stay hopeful. I fight when I have a bad day. I say, okay, body, what do you need? Let me give it to you to my best capability, and then keep moving forward. And regime and regimen and having a diet and having, my life scheduled out and my supplements at the right time and all the things I need is super critical. If I need my sleep, I need my sleep, and I need to tell my husband, hey, you're helping with the kids, or I need to tell my nanny, hey, you're doing this, or my mom, hey, I need your help. Asking for help too. So those are all really important things. Regimen, ask for help, and keep an open mind.
So Kenzie, let's walk one piece back before we move to the transformation, which is one of the things we understand during the rehab phase. As Italians, Matt and I are always going to bring Parmesan or some other Italian food into our frameworks, right?
Hey.
So yeah. That's right. So in Parm, one of the things that we understand is during the rehab phase, you have to rebuild your gut because these treatments are going to kill your gut. And Lyme probably itself is going to, when you become chronically ill, it's going to alter your gut health. But you also have to rewire your brain, right? I mean, your brain has been jumbled. Is it because of the bugs in your brain? Is it because of the bad experiences you have? Is it because you've been gaslit? Is that a combination of all that? But you can have these unhealthy neural pathways that have to be rewired. And the way you did it is with the ketamine treatment, right? You use ketamine as the vehicle for rewiring your brain. You can move forward with having, a healthy, rehabilitated brain, and you rebuilt your gut through, the FMT protocol, right? Now you're in a place where you're now in maintenance, right? And what does maintenance mean? It means listening to your body. It means listening to your emotions, being the sentient person that we can be when we become more competent as opposed to confident, or we moved away from that term, right? And it's really just having a self-care regimen that allows you to be what you can be.
Yes, allowing yourself grace and knowing what your body needs and being an advocate for your body and listening is is the best advice you could give someone with any chronic illness and just anyone in life. People, everybody's going through something, and being mindful of that, because I can't tell you how many times people even knew I was sick and they would say things like, well, you look good. At least you're pretty. At least and I'm like, you have no idea. And that was even more debilitating, right? So,
Well, it's triggering, right? I mean, it's another thing that when you say to a person with a fragile trigger, that is going to send them into a place where they're not going to be in a healing mode, because they're going to be triggered into the sympathetic expression of their nervous system.
Right. You said it. And yeah, maintenance is the biggest piece of the healing journey. And I think, and I think it's a combination of things that you need to be strict about for yourself, and knowing that you're surrounding yourself in the right environment, as I mentioned before, because if you're putting yourself on, the Facebook pages that people are just chronically ill and expressing the negativity or the darkness of that space, that can be infectious too. And so it's really, finding that area where you're thriving, you have a purpose, and you're doing the right things, fulfilling your body for your overall health, that continues to project you forward, and getting light to do that too. So if it's prayer, if it's family, if it's, connection, that's on the mental side. And then definitely one of the big pieces is the diet, right? And what you're taking in, what you're consuming, your nutrition, and fulfilling that, and fulfilling the body. So it's fulfilling the mind, fulfilling the body, and then fulfilling the spirit. It's really holistic.
And one of the things you have to make sure that you're doing, just as you wanted to make sure that you don't ruin your gut health by taking more antibiotics or any kind of medication that could ruin your gut health, especially after you rebuilt it through the FMT therapy. We also want to make sure you're guarding your brain, right? And one of the things that the brilliant Tony Robbins talks about is how people can upload into our brain really unhealthy thoughts, which then can build unhealthy neural pathways, which you needed to rebuild. And in your case, it was through the ketamine treatment, right? But just because you were able to rewire your brain through using that very powerful tool, doesn't mean that if you put yourself in a position where you're in these groups that are unhealthy on one level or another, whether they be Lyme groups or not, what's happening is you're not guarding your brain, and you're allowing really unhealthy software to be uploaded into your brain.
Yeah, I love that you put it that way. I think that's really philosophical. It's good. It's well said. It is true. I mean, social media is, it's a whole different topic that is greatly influencing our society today. And so we do have to be mindful of what we're consuming out there. And I think if it doesn't serve you, don't give it time.
So now let's and that's with anything, right? I mean, that's part of maturing into this maintenance phase, where during the prehabilitation phase, you're developing some tools which you're bringing to the assist phase, and developing more tools that you're bringing to the rehab phase, which you're bringing with you to the maintenance phase. And all of these things you built into your toolbox, you now take with you, so that you can have all of the habits that are healthy, not for humans generally, but specifically for you. You get to understand your body. You get to understand your brain. You understand how to read your emotions. You understand what it is you need to do to remain healthy and be the person you can be. And part of that, of course, is taking with you what these experiences have taught you about you spiritually, right? What were you made to do, and how can you serve? Because one of the things we all learn when we get to a point where we've made this transformation is that a basic human need is to serve others, right? So talk to us now about how you learned about the importance of serving others as part of your maintenance, and how you understand that the only way that you can be joyful is by serving, and how that presented itself in the creation of that beautiful book that you've written, working in various not-for-profit arenas, and serving the community of people you serve through the business that you're the vice president of.
Beautiful. Yes, totally, Rich. My service to the Lyme community and others is part of my healing journey, and it's gotten me to mentally to a place that I can sustain the workload and stress that I have in my life without having that relapse. And that's really important. It brings me purpose. It guides, it's like the North Star, it's guiding me to something bigger and better. And I do believe that I had to go through suffering to really realize what true happiness was, or what Father Spitzer calls joy. There's an amazing book about happiness and the levels of happiness. And there's very superficial happiness, which is the majority of what people seek, but it doesn't bring you happiness until you lose something detrimental. And when I lost my health, I thought I lost it all. And when I realized that I gained that back, I wanted to make sure that I came to a place of appreciating joy and true happiness. And I wanted to give that back to other people and help lift them up from a dark place, or know that they're not alone. Like almost every person I've met with a chronic illness or is in a suffering state feels alone, that they're the only person going through this. And that's just simply not true. There are people suffering like you are suffering. You just need to find the right people to help you through it. And it's not trying to relate, maybe, or it might not be a direct relation, a lateral relation, but understanding that, hey, they've suffered and they've fought their way out of it to get to a better place. That alone gives people hope. And so I wanted to come back into the community and not just go, oh, okay, well, now I'm in a better place, so I'm just going to go work and make money and, be happy in my life. That wasn't serving me. I could do that and I can continue to do that, but that wasn't what was filling my cup at the end of the day. There was something missing. And so when I kept, having restless night's sleep and thinking, okay, what is it? What's missing, Kenzie? Like, you're feeling great. You got a great career. You're having you have a kid. What are you going to do now? And Lyme kept pulling me back, in the Lyme community, and that there was still a need out there. And it was still an underserved community. It's undereducated. People don't know about it even to this day. And when I shared my story more publicly, it was amazing how it was just overwhelming. The people that were like, oh my gosh, I know somebody with Lyme. Oh my gosh, I need your help. I love for you to talk to this one person, and da 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 da. And it was so fulfilling. People are like, do you have time? And I was like, I'll make time. Like, yeah, not really. No, I don't have time, but I'll make time because I believe in the mission. And I believe if there's a reason you're connecting with me, there's something I can do to help you, even if it's getting you a suggested doctor or relating to a symptom you have, or the majority of people who come to me, they don't have their diagnosis yet. So they're like, what does that look like? How do I get diagnosed? What is the testing I should look into? And then that's why I also wanted to partner with GLA, not to just be a Google expert or an Instagram expert, but also be at the front lines of like groundbreaking research to support the community with what is the groundbreaking research in the Lyme space? What's new and improving in the diagnostic space and in the treatment space? And I wanted to be at the front lines of that so I could provide the most accurate and up-to-date information to the community that was reaching out to me.
And that's really a beautiful description and a beautiful way to tie up this podcast, which, again, we thank you and your husband and your children for sharing you with us for the last 2 hours. So we don't take you away from those important people in your life any longer. Let me ask you the final question that we now ask everyone on the Tick Boot Camp podcast. So if I were to ask you, what are the 3 most important low-cost or no-cost treatment options that you'd recommend to a new person in the community, what would they be?
Podcasts. Education. Get educated. Get to know about your diagnosis if you're new to it, or you had a friend that told you that they were just diagnosed or recently exposed to it. Get educated. Learn.
Okay, so education is number 1, particularly through the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
number 2.
Yeah. And my book, Ignored Pandemic.
All right. So number 2 is education through reading.
Yeah. Well, I would say education is just a big global thing. I mean, secondarily, number 2, I would say is really in nutrition. Making pivotal life choices through dietary action. So really fulfilling your body with the right nutrition, because I think that's part of the prehab, rehab, and maintenance phase is really what we're putting in the body and what we eat. And it will make a difference in the treatment phase. It makes a difference in the healing phase, and it makes a difference in the maintenance phase. So being mindful of that nutrition.
Okay, so I'm gonna characterize number one as becoming more competent through education, using tools like podcasts and books like yours. Number two, it's going to be nutrition, being very careful about what you put in your body, because you need to recognize that having a sound nutritional foundation is going to be necessary for you to heal. And choice number three.
This is a hard one, but I would say, okay, what's going to come naturally? What came first? Find your joy. And it could be simply a hobby that you love, like doing art or like whatever it may be. Keep doing that and stick to that hobby that you're passionate about, because that also brings a sense of healing and calming, that there's a place and an outlet for you to go. If it's listening to music, if it's, building websites, if it's designing on, creating Pinterest boards, whatever it may be, it could be something simple or big. But I think that's really important for people. They lose their passion when struggling with illness, and then it's really hard to get out of that dark space. So finding joy in every day through your passion.
So number one is competence, becoming more competent through education. Number two is going to be building a strong nutritional foundation by eating sound foods. And number three, I'm actually going to characterize for you as finding purpose. One of the things that the brilliant Anthony Burroughs has taught through his research, Cornell University professor, actually you have a certificate from Cornell, so one of your alma maters, is that one of the three ways you can find your purpose is by doing the things you've always enjoyed doing and look at what insight you gain by doing the things you're always doing and why you've always done that. So we can now, free of charge, figure out those things we've always enjoyed doing and help that to define what our purpose is and how we will ultimately be serving the community and finding joy so we can stay in a healthy maintenance phase.
Yes, lovely. Lovely summed up. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kenzie, for spending so much time with us here on Tick Boot Camp. I know the folks in our community are really going to value all of the wonderful lessons you've taught us.
I'm very appreciative. Thank you so much.